Hi, and welcome to this episode of They Learn, You Win, the podcast from Skooks. I'm your host, David Wentworth, and I'm coming to you from my temporary location as I've been displaced by the recent hurricanes here in Florida. So if you're actually watching the video of this, you may notice my background is a bit different. But I was very lucky to find a spot to record my podcast, and as well as very lucky to have a guest come in that sort of brightened my day in the midst of all this. In this particular episode, we're going to talk a lot about engaging learners, understanding their needs, the whole what's in it for me question, and, tying learner needs to business needs and all of that. And I couldn't have asked for a better guest to do that with. I have Alexandra Hyland. She is the head of functional learning and culture, as well as the global senior director of learning and diversity for Kraft Heinz. She's a perfect candidate to talk about this stuff, as she's got a background in political science, ethics, law. She actually has a master's degree in counseling psychology and has done a lot of postgraduate work in HR. So she definitely understands how to get to what people want, what they need, and to understand how they want to contribute to the organization. So we had a really great conversation about engaging learners. I think you'll enjoy it. I know that I did. So please enjoy. So Alexandra, I'm so excited that you finally were able to join us. I've been chasing you for a little while, and it's great to have you here. I think people are going to really enjoy hearing from you about your experience with learning at Kraft Heinz, because I believe, a big focus for me, there's these sort of like these big chunks of the L&D world that I tend to love to focus on. And the whole idea of engaging learners and keeping them interested, and coming back for more is a big thing for me. I'm always trying to explore that, what's really at the heart of engagement and keeping people connected. Because I think there's a lot of time and energy focused on how we build content and how we think about things to make it engaging. But I think the engagement challenge is much broader than just that, right? And I think you obviously represent a great perspective on that, especially since we're talking, what is it, about 36,000 employees across the world, 40 something companies. Yeah. So no small feat, right? It's hard enough to keep a room of 12 people engaged in anything, right? So the ability to do that on a global scale, I think is pretty fascinating. So to just sort of dive right in, if you, I'm not going to make you encapsulate your entire philosophy on engagement right here in the opening, but just, your initial thoughts of like, what are the things that really spark your interest when you start thinking about this thing? What are the first things that you tend to go to when you start to think about engaging learners?
I love this question because it really centers us in, what is it truly all about, right? And I think so often we jump to what's the ROI and how are we going to measure the output? And all of those things are super, super important, but they're not where I start. Where I start is sort of three big things. Number one is truly understanding the business. What is it as a business that we're trying to do, right? What is the end goal? Understanding not only for the company, but within the market, within the industry, the world, et cetera, really being able to, understand what are we trying to do at the end of the day? Because there can be multiple paths to get there, right? But the clearer we are on where we're trying to go, the better. Then I start to think about, what does the learner care about? It's the WIFM, right? I heard someone say WIFM and I thought, what is that? But it's something that I've always been, talking about, which is what's in it for me. If I approach a learner with a business first WIFM, right? Yeah, maybe it's compelling, but at the end of the day, it's what's in it for the learner. And if that is aligned with what the business needs, then suddenly you're cooking with gas, right? And I always joke that, the privilege of a lifetime is working in a job where I get to hang out at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. I like to refer to Maslow like he's my buddy, he's my pal. We're on a first last name basis. Maybe it's because it's one of the few things that I remember from undergrad, but the idea being that we all want to feel good, right? That's at the end of the day what we want. We want to feel good. We want to feel good about ourselves. We want to feel good about what we do, the impact that we make in the world. How that materializes in an individual is going to be different, right? Whether it's, you're on the track to be C-suite, whether you're a subject matter expert who just has such a passion for a topic and you're hungry for more, or whether you're somebody who just genuinely wants to make tomorrow easier than today, right? I can do something better, faster, easier. The point is we all want to be at that level of sort of self-actualization, development. We want to feel invested in, we want to feel cared about. So when I think about how to deliver learning, it's really at the end of the day, how do I connect to another person and what they need and what they want and what their purpose is and what drives them, what makes them excited about life. And when you do that, you start to look at things a little differently. You start to think in ways that are naturally engaging first, right? Versus engagement being the afterthought, let's order some sandwiches and cookies and that will be the win. Believe me, food is always a win. I work for a food company, but it's really at that intrinsic level of like, how can I help one person feel better, feel invested in, feel cared about in what we're delivering? How do I make it clear to them that this is going to be something that helps and can make their life better? And when you do that, suddenly I think a different kind of magic starts to unfold. And so that's what gets me excited about learning.
And it's great to hear it. I talk about this a lot, and we've never directly had this conversation before. And to hear you sort of validating a lot of the things that I've said in very recently in public, and sometimes you get some pushback, and I wonder, okay, am I thinking about this slightly incorrectly? But I think you're spot on. It aligns very much with what I think. I think that what's in it for me is such a big thing. I've been using that phrase for a very long time, trying to convince people that it's not some sort of negative, selfish thing. I think very often people hear that and their brain immediately goes to, why does that matter? Like, why are you so selfish? It isn't about you, right? But the reality is, as people, as human beings, we are asking ourselves that question every minute of every day, every time we engage with something, subconsciously or consciously. We're asking ourselves, what's in it for me? And even in the most selfless act in the world that you could do, you're still processing that question, because maybe what's in it for you is that the act is selfless and that's what you want to do.
Right. It feels good.
And so you're 100% like the idea that I think people get a little, they get a little baffled if you try to simplify something. Like, people just want to feel good, and they think, well, yeah, but that's too simple. But if you have to start there, right? That's like, where do you go from there? And then you can't keep taking this sort of, as you're talking about it, it's like, yeah, so many companies take this sort of parental approach to learning of, this is for your own good. You'll understand later. When you get a little older, you'll know why we did this, right? And it's like, no, you need to tell me that doesn't work anymore. Like, I want to be on your side. I want to be on your team. Help me. Tell me what I need to do. And I also love your bit about that sort of just help someone be a little bit better the next day, right? How do I get better? Because I think we also get caught up in the, how do we create the future leaders of tomorrow? How do we, that's all great, but like, you can't focus on that all the time, because then you're going to lose people who just want to be really good at what they do day after day.
Well, and I think it loses sight of incremental gains, right? That most learning programs are transformational. They're all these things, but those gains take time to apply, to try, to be coached through. And so let's not lose sight of the incremental gains that can be made every day through learning and through the focus on learning and development. I think you said something about, businesses being reluctant to kind of have the conversation about what's in it for the learner. I think part of being a strategic learning practitioner is being able to tell the story in two ways, right? When you're talking to those that need to invest in what you want to deliver, who need to see results, the way that we're going to frame that conversation for buy-in is maybe going to be slightly different than the way that I'm going to approach the learner and explain to them, the what's in it for me. But I think that's the that's the missing link, is being able to frame the same thing in different ways, depending on what we're trying to accomplish and who we're talking to. If I talk to my learner the way that I might try to sell in for an investment in a program, it doesn't have the same resonance. And again, I go back to, I think it's also helping the learner make the connection to the business and why this matters. Part of the what's in it for me is knowing that you are contributing to how the business is going to, achieve its objectives. That's not lost on me. I mean, I want my business to succeed. That is compelling for me. And it's not always as obvious to the learner as we think it is, because we live in it all day, every day, right? To my mind, I'm not going to roll out something unless I'm sure that there's going to be an impact, but I should not take for granted that that's always super clear to my learner, because they don't live in the world that I do. And so making sure that we spend time on the communication, on the clear, sort of simple, to your point, articulation of why this matters is so important. And I think, I remember having conversations with my team too, where I said, you can design the best, categorically the best learning program in the world. But if we don't think through how we then share it, how we market it for all intents and purposes, how we communicate it, if it doesn't look and feel branded in such a way that is compelling to the learner, they're never going to know that it's the best program ever, because they might not even be there. Right. So the best program in the world, design wise, is 75% of the scorecard. Right. We got to take it across the finish line with that clear narrative, that compelling communication and brand. And no program is too big or too small to necessitate that. Right. Sometimes we only put that on the really big programs. We think about, oh my gosh, we've invested all this. Okay, now we're going to have a brand for it. Don't forget that even for your lunch and learn, for your webinar, any time that we want to take people's time away from the day-to-day, we owe it to them and to the program to make it clear that the juice is worth the squeeze, the time is worth the effort, and an hour now, a day now, a week now is going to yield X, Y, and Z in the future. But if we don't communicate that, we can't expect our learner to just naturally make that bridge.
Right. I think, yeah, the vast majority of engagement happens before anybody even opens a link or clicks on something, right? It's getting that person to do that. And then once they're in, making sure it's compelling and engaging enough that the next time, like you said, that look and feel, every time they feel themselves in that environment, they get that feeling of, oh yeah, that's right. This is the thing that's going to help me do the next thing. And, there is this sweet spot, right, between what's in it for me on a very personal level to the learner and the business impact. And that's where the struggle is, right? Again, and it's not a terribly awful thing, but so many companies are very much focused on impacting the business. That's the goal. But you can't do that to the exclusion of the learner, saying like, again, it's that parental, just do it because it's good for the business, that then you're just going to start to get, diminishing returns and actually negative reaction. But then it can't all be, touchy-feely, just like, hey man, we just want this for you so you feel good and everything went well this week. There's that place in between. And if you're doing this right, if the company is struggling with, we've identified what we're trying to do from a business impact standpoint, we know what that is. And then you can't draw a very simple, maybe not simple, but comprehensible line between that and what's in it for me for the learner. You've got a bigger problem than engagement. Right? There should be a way, whatever the business goals are, there is a way to draw that to every single person in the organization that needs to somehow impact that outcome. And you can make it clear for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And the engagement piece goes beyond, okay, I've received an invite, looks good, program's good, right? Important. But it goes so far beyond that into creating a culture of curiosity, a culture of learning, such that it's part of the DNA of the organization. And that is something that requires, I think, it's like a garden. You constantly have to be nurturing it, watering it, tending to it, and not letting any moment go by that could be a moment to reinforce that that's the intent of the organization, is to be a learning organization, right? And we talk a lot about it's got to be top down. Of course, right? We need our leaders to model that behavior, that they are focused on their own learning and curiosity and development. But I think one population in particular that is often maybe not talked about is that middle manager who inherently understands how important learning is, sees that the leaders are talking about how important it is, but they themselves are struggling with how to kind of do the day-to-day, right? Lead their teams. Often they are, leading, could be large teams. They've got pressure kind of from every direction. How do we help that middle manager be able to cultivate that curiosity and that sort of prioritization of learning amidst everything that they're trying to do? Right? Because I often find they're the group that tells me that they feel like it's the hardest to do. There's a platform for senior leaders to sort of espouse the importance of learning. And don't get me wrong, that is so critical. You're really in trouble if you don't have that. And then you have learners who are hungry and excited, but it often comes to that middle manager to figure out, how do I get the day-to-day job done and also make sure that my team has time for learning? And so I have huge respect for that group of leaders. And I love working with them to figure out, how do we make it so that learning doesn't have to be this incredibly defined moment, right? We are off-site. We are learning right now. Like, this is protected time for learning. We're taking a week. That's a heavy lift. That's hard to do. It's great. But how to create that culture of learning on your team where micro moments are acknowledged as learning moments, right? If you have a team meeting, can you take 5 minutes of that agenda and talk about a new topic, right? Can you host a discussion, a conversation? Can you invite members of the team to share something that they've been working on, that they've recently learned? There are ways to create that culture of learning that don't necessarily necessitate sweeping overtures, very grand gestures, but signal to a team that a growth mindset, a learning mindset, a culture of curiosity is welcome and celebrated and expected here.
Yeah, I agree that management layer is often overlooked in a number of different ways. It's sort of leapfrogged in the learning space, like you're saying, so skipped over, unless they're providing maybe some leadership development, which is fine and good, but that's sort of managers as a recipient of learning, as opposed to the manager's probably your best friend from a learning perspective. Like, they're the ones, they have a much better understanding, hopefully, and I hope no one takes offense to this, or maybe they do. The managers have a much better understanding of what the business needs than the L&D team. You would hope, right? I mean, I'm not saying that the L&D team doesn't know. That's the job. Get in there, be a partner. But the manager, by definition of their role, has a much closer role to the needs of the business. But they also have a much closer connection to everybody else, like their teams and what they do on a daily basis, how they operate, what works, what doesn't, what their schedules are like, how they like to work. No one else is going to know that. And so, recruiting the manager to be your ally. Like, listen, I'm not here just to throw training in your face. You and I can work together so that we are going to make your teams, hyper perform if we do all this stuff. Because when we don't take that approach, when the manager gets ignored, that's when training looks like the opposite of what you're describing. It's the manager isn't like, oh, we have this opportunity to take this time together to learn. It's like, sorry, everybody, new training just came down.
Gotta do the thing.
And all of a sudden you're even the potential for engagement has fallen off the cliff, just because the manager has signaled that it's not important or not going to be good.
Absolutely. I mean, it's even just in that tone. You did it, right? Just like, we have to. I mean, oh my gosh, you're sunk already, right? But I love what you said, and something that we do that I've seen great success with, to your point, is help the manager be the partner in the experience. So part of engagement is, I'm a learner. I have this tremendous experience, right? I've learned all these things. I'm so excited. I come back. Nothing, right? And that's so disengaging. That's so disappointing, because you come back, you're fired up. I've got these new skills, new tools. Let me at it, coach. But often that's not the manager's fault. They didn't even necessarily know what you just went through. Maybe you were nominated, picked for something, you self-enrolled in something. So something we've been trying is, how do we equip the manager to feel good about what just happened? Hey, manager, this is the program. These are the things they're going to learn. How do you nudge the manager after the program to say, it's over? Here are some great questions you could ask your direct report about the experience. Help them, right? I've never met a manager that didn't care and didn't want to do these things. They just didn't know. So how do we equip the manager, give them the tools, give them the insight to make them a coach, an enabler in the process? And my goodness, does it feel good when you come off a program and your manager's like, tell me all about it, and then how do you extend that further? The manager says, I'd love it if you would share with the team what you learned. What could we try on the team that you learned? What could we try and apply? How do you build that sort of experimental mindset? Let's run an experiment. Let's try it. But for heaven's sakes, we have to help the manager. We have to help them know what just happened. We have to help make them a partner. And when we make them a partner in the experience, then they become an advocate. They become an evangelist. They want to. Suddenly those are the managers emailing me saying, hey, can I get in on that? Or, hey, could you come in? We've got this challenge. Could you come and help me? Because they see us then as that strategic partner. They see us as enabling them to be amazing managers, that their voice matters, because it's so critical. Again, you can run the best program by definition in the world, but if that program doesn't include the post-program follow-up and care, I would argue it's not the best program, right? But it's so easy to forget that part because we're so focused on what happens sort of between the start and finish of the program itself, the employee-facing part, that when it's over, it's, okay, measure and on to the next. Yeah. But what? Learning is something that is going to take time. And how can we continue to help both the learner and the manager revisit the experience weeks and even months later so that we can start battling that forgetting curve? And more than that, every time, you said it, somebody has a positive experience with the learning, the next time they're joining a little faster, or they're reaching out a little bit more proactively, or they're more excited about what's coming. So, it's sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way when we spend the time to bookend the experience with great comms at the beginning, that really clear narrative, what's in it for me? And then the care on the end to say, how do we keep this going? How do we include your manager? How do we keep supporting you and keeping this top of mind and giving you opportunity to try and apply? Because the other thing I find is managers don't always know exactly how to give opportunity for try and apply when the person comes back to the day job, right? They know that's important, but what if we gave them ideas? What if we gave them sort of a cheat sheet? Then they take the learning and run and keep going. And suddenly the investment is sort of multiplying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the rewards reaped from that kind of approach, it's you listed them all as the idea that it isn't just, the after the fact allows the manager to get more involved, but then there's that, fighting the forgetting curve. We should be doing this anyway, right? If you're going to invest all this time and energy in the program, whether or not you strictly adhere to the concept of the actual Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, right? I think we can all agree that if you don't come back to something in some meaningful way, most of it will be forgotten. So at the very least, we should be doing something like that to prevent that from happening. But then that also prevents the opportunity, like you described, for the manager to be involved and to show how things should work and be there. I get my mind blown whenever I come into these instances where the manager didn't actually even know what training was going on with their teams. Like you mentioned it. And it's like, yeah, but that's a reality. That happens. That people get training because, like I said, this manager spot is a blind spot because in the roles in the hierarchy, it's like, well, this person doesn't need this training because they're the manager. So we're just going to shoot the training to the people in the team, and the manager doesn't even really know what's going on. So they can't be involved. They can't interact. They can't do the tail end of it. So again, Yeah, I think you're spot on. That's a huge piece of engagement. And it isn't just the initial engagement, it's the ongoing. And then the next time around is very cyclical. So huge, important role. I think one of the challenges there is nobody wants to give the managers more work. Right. I think there's like, listen, they're already, but the idea is, listen, yeah, you might have to pay a little more attention to this thing, but in the big picture, it actually means less work. Right.
Well, and we're not going to send you hunting to figure out, okay, what was this and who, why? And we're going to give you everything that we can to equip you to feel confident and capable in front of your team. You know, what you do with it, what's that expression? Like you can lead, the horse to water. At that point, that's where your management style and technique and everything is going to come in. But I am going to give you everything so that you're not in the dark. You're informed, you're aware, you're engaged. Because I think that's what we all want, right? We want to feel competent and capable and informed. And so, when we do that, I think the benefits really start to kind of gain, they multiply, as we said, they multiply, right?
And I've said this on the podcast before, but there's, this idea about engagement and trying to get people, interested in the learning programs and get them to engage with them and complete them and all of this. It starts to create, because it's a lot of times it is hard work to do this stuff and to build it and do it well. You start to think of it as adversarial almost, right? Like, how do I trick people into doing this? And it's like, okay, let's take a step back and realize that, people are by definition learners, right? We always refer to them as learners when we're talking about L&D stuff. I notice this all the time. I do it. Everyone does it. When we're talking about people as they engage with what we do, we refer to them as learners, not employees, not even people. Not that I'm saying we're dehumanizing them, but it creates this very narrow perspective in my mind that L&D looks at a person in the company and says, when you're with me, you're this, you're a learner. And then I will release you back into the wild to do whatever it is that you do. And the idea is, listen, we're all learners every single day. Whether or not I woke up this morning and said, I'm really excited about this program that's coming, or I woke up and didn't really even want to go to work today, right? I mean, you've got the spectrum of people, but all of those people, whether they like it or not, are learning all day in certain ways. And so the idea is, okay, listen, learning's happening. How do we channel that? How do we focus on it? How do we capitalize on the fact that people as human beings need to learn things almost every day in order to get through their lives, right? So this is all we're trying to do is like, okay, we can tap into that. And that doesn't mean you can't build these big, very in-depth programs. Obviously we should and should, but we also need to all around that. How do we grab people so that they're getting what they need as they get through life and don't even realize that they're learning just because they're going through their day? Like I needed to do this thing. I didn't know how. Now I do. And I did it. And that could be a 6-month thing to learn how to do, or it could be a 30-second thing to learn how to do. How do we tap into that and get it? Cause like, again, I feel like for most people that are working at any job, the opportunity for engagement is already there, right? We're not starting at a negative. You're at least starting at 0, but probably starting somewhere higher, like a 10%. Like people just know, like, in order to exist, I need to learn something, subconsciously even. And then, okay, what do we do with it? But I think, unfortunately, we end up squandering whatever we've already got by making it very formulaic, very parochial, very, prescriptive. It has to be this, or, all stick, no carrot kind of stuff. And then we're fighting ourselves to try to build that engagement back up. I think if we start at a place where we're like, listen, people already want to know things. How do we get it to them the way that makes the most sense?
Absolutely. And I think like when we think about, you sort of said it, like these big, heavy learning programs, I think that there is this sense sometimes that learning happens when we go off site, we're in a classroom, there's a workbook, it's completely focused time on this one thing. Sure. I mean, hey, that's the dream. I would love to do that all day, every day. But I spend a lot of time trying to help people recognize when learning is happening and it's not quite as obvious, right? You're sitting in a monthly performance review, and, you're working through a particular challenge, right? And someone's presenting an analysis and you work through it and you figure out what the root cause is and you implement a intervention. Learning just happened, right? it just happened because you figured out, we have a problem, we solved it, and now next time we know X, Y, and Z that we didn't know before. That's learning. Now, if we let that moment just kind of go and pass us by, learning happened, but we didn't necessarily acknowledge it. We didn't recognize it when it was happening. Our brain did, but we didn't sort of consciously say, oh, I just learned something, right? And so a lot of what I try to do is help people realize when learning is happening and to take that moment to reflect, whether it's in the immediate moment or even just developing a practice of reflection to understand, what did I learn today? Because I would challenge anyone to say that they got, to your point, through the day and learned nothing. But if we don't acknowledge where learning happened, and that learning can happen in formal and informal ways, right? With a textbook or with experience, most often it's happening through experience. But if we're not sort of seeing it in that moment, if we're not recognizing what just happened and what we learned, we're not going to get the most benefit from it. But it also helps us in a world where we don't have the time necessarily to always send people for multi-day programs, off-site, whether it's a time constraint, a budget constraint. But that doesn't mean that we're not still investing in the learning and investing in somebody's development, right? We just have to help make it clear, hey, we just learned something. Let's kind of explore that for a second, figure out what we learned, and how do we make sure that we carry that learning forward? And then I think people it's almost like learning spotting, right? You start going, oh, learning just happened there. Oh, learning just happened there. But we have to break this mental model that says the only way that I'm getting learning or invested in is if I'm in this sort of special program, right? And so that's back to the culture of curiosity, the culture of learning, the fact that you can learn in 30 seconds, right? We have access to so many resources, through our employment. How can we leverage those and see them as investments in us and leverage them accordingly?
Well, and I think it stems from, and I do see this changing, it's slow, but it's been changing, but it stems from just the way L&D has been done over time. It calcifies, right? It builds up sort of these processes and infrastructure and the way things work, so that when new ideas come around and these kinds of learning experiences that you're describing, it's like, well, I can't figure out how to mark that as complete. And I can't figure out how to ask somebody if they liked it. So I can't focus on that because I have no control over it, or at least I feel like I have no control over it when it happens. So I need to focus on these things where I can plug it into this big learning machine that's been running, autonomously for years before I even got to this organization. Like, I just need to plug everything in and see what comes out on the other side. And it's like, that approach doesn't work in this world where we recognize that people are just constantly learning what they need as they go. So, okay, maybe don't worry about if they completed this thing. What's another way we can measure whether or not people are getting what they need? Let's start thinking about it that way. Like, we're trying to shove stuff in this box. And like I said, it is changing. I don't want to make some blanket generalization. I've been studying this space for 15 years, and it's definitely moved in the right direction, but it's hard. It's hard to break down those institutional walls that, like, this is just, and it isn't even that people feel like this is the way we've always done it, so I want to do it that. It's just like, this is the way it is, and I can't do anything about it.
And I think too, and I've seen it changing even from, earlier in my career, when learning was reserved sort of for two distinct populations. The first was onboarding. And even then I would question, was that learning or was that just sort of communicating policy and procedure? And then for your sort of, the second group was leadership, kind of high potential executives. And there was this sort of dearth in the middle, like what's happening here? That wonderfully, I think, has changed incredibly to ensure that that's not sort of the only avenue for learning. But then to your point, it was really kind of, when you start to mix in things like compliance learning that has a legal component, you need to get into that checkbox kind of space. But we all kind of want that extrinsic reward for doing things. But ultimately, we know that the real driver is that intrinsic piece. But that intrinsic piece is fed when our leaders, our managers acknowledge that we've grown, right? It's maybe easier way to acknowledge when there's a checkbox. Look, you did 10 things. But when your manager says to you, "Wow, I noticed you did that. how did that happen? Where did you learn that? Can you tell me more about that? That is rewarding when you start to see that people who are being rewarded and promoted and growing in their career are the ones that are engaging in these behaviors. That then becomes that sort of recognition of the intrinsic, external recognition of the intrinsic, if that makes any sense. But that's hard to do. And I think it takes us back to that manager conversation. How do we set ourselves up to be seeing people, seeing what they're doing, seeing what they're trying? And I want to acknowledge the incredibly hardworking manager who's trying to do all that in a world that's moving so very fast, where we all have way more to do than seems time in the day. But anything then that we can do to help make it easy for the manager and easy for the learner to connect, to share experiences, and to celebrate the learning that's happening all the time, that creates a tremendous culture that I think can only be seen as positive.
For sure. So I've heard you throw words of a lot of different C words like curious and culture and celebrate. But I know that you've got sort of these other the three C's that you like to sort of focus on within this realm of engagement. Talk a little bit about those.
Yeah. So in a world, again, where, we do have finite time, we have finite resources, but we seem to have infinite need, right? You can throw your hands up and sort of say, I can only do what I can do, or, whatever your, choice phrase is there. But I think one thing that I like to look at is how we get to the content. Here's another C word, the content that we want to deliver. And I think there's three ways you can do that. You can create, you can curate, and you can collaborate. And so I think if I look back to even early in my career, again, like create was kind of the only approach, right? If you weren't creating, what were you doing? We would be building programs. They would be heavy builds. It might take a year to get something off the ground. And that worked, and that was fine in that moment. The world is moving way too fast for us to move at that pace, right? And the cost of those programs is prohibitive in many ways. There are still very, very good reasons to build and create a custom program. And we do it all the time. But we have other options that didn't exist before that we can tap in to be so much more agile in this changing world. There's nothing more heartbreaking than building a program only to realize that the need has changed, the tool has changed, the people have changed. So then instead we go to curate. So we live in this world where everybody is so keen to teach each other, right? You can go on TikTok and learn just about anything, right? And learn it fast. But there's such a wealth of knowledge and information that we can and should be leveraging. Why reinvent the wheel when what we can be doing is bringing the greatest minds together to deliver learning at speed? The challenge there is I like to think of it right now a little bit like a buffet in Vegas, right? You're just like, I don't know where to start. There's so much. And I mean, if you're me, I go to the desserts. I should probably start with the salad, But part of curation is helping to make selections and choices for folks, create much smaller menus of options that help our teams, our people get to what they need fast, right? And make it available to them. And in the time that you save by not creating all the back end stuff, take that time then to create application exercise, on the job practice, time for coaching, make it sticky, right? And then the last one, collaborate. Again, it's sort of a mixture of create and curate, but I have the privilege of working with probably some of the smartest people in the entire world. I don't need to go outside. I need to find a way to collaborate with them to take the beautiful, incredible, deep subject matter expertise that they have, and then what I know about adult learning, about engagement, about all these things, and put them together, again, to move at speed and, capitalize on what we've got. Collaborate can also mean, how can we partner with other people? So we ran a program not long ago where we actually partnered with another company, and we said, you're doing something, we're doing something. We need to learn the same things, and we can learn from each other. let's learn together. Right. And we collaborated on that. And that was super cool and super engaging. But I think those 3 C's, create, curate, collaborate, allow us to move in a world that's going way faster than ever before. We can't throw our hands up and say, well, you're going to get one great program a year. No, we need to move at the pace of, culture, at the pace of disruption. And we can do that by being really smart about leveraging what we've got, where we've got it, and then building in any of the supports that take something from being just sort of a piece of information to a true piece of transformation and learning.
Yeah, it got me thinking about the middle part there, the curate part, because and I can't believe I'm going to do this, because normally what happens is at some point on the podcast, my guest will bring up AI, and I always note the time because it just comes up it always comes up in every single, I'm going to be the one that brings it up. So for the first
What's
time,
the time? Take note.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up first, but the curate piece to me, I think there was sort of a focus on curation for a while. I remember, it was a topic, it would come up a lot, and, the idea of how do we, all these things that are available to us, how do we make sure we're getting the right thing to the right people? And there was this skill set, right? That was the new future skill. Curation was going to be the key to everything. And I believe it. I'm not saying this to say that wasn't true. 100% true. What I'm getting at is I feel like all of a sudden, as you were talking, I realized I don't hear about that much anymore. And I'm afraid it's because people think that, well, the technology is going to curate it now because AI is smart. It's going to do all of it. And that terrifies me a little bit, at least at this stage. Because I've seen what AI returns from a curation standpoint, and it's horrifying in most cases. So what are your thoughts on that? You think that, did we somehow abdicate our role as curators? Or do you think that's happening at all?
I hope not. I hope not. I think it's changing. I think it's going to exist still, but it's going to change, as is, world is wont to do. But if I think back, because I'm old enough to remember the time before the internet, I remember the dire warnings. You mustn't use the internet. It's all garbage, right? I remember, I maybe am one of the few left that remember in university going to the stacks, and you had to source the journals and the pages, and heaven forbid you would cite the internet. Then there was, there's some good stuff on the internet, but you had to become an expert. You remember the term Boolean searching, right? there was a skill set around how to find the needle in the haystack. Then the technology evolved in Google, and, now you can get anything. But it took time for people to develop that skill. And now we don't think of it as a skill, but at the time there was definitely, to your point, a skill. AI, I think, is going to go through the same journey, maybe just a little bit faster, but we need to be equipping people to understand how to get the best from the technology, how to, like back in the day, decide whether this is valid or invalid, right? Whether this is accurate or inaccurate. And then I think helping people to understand that AI might return to you a wonderful synopsis of a concept, right? This is going to explain, I'll say, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. It's great. It helps me a lot. But what it will never, I think, be able to replace, or at least not anytime soon, is the practice, the application, the how do I bring this on the job? How do I get that feedback in the moment from a human, right? And so I think our role in curation is going to change slightly, and that we're going to be able to help people get to the information quickly by teaching them how to do that, right? Right now it's prompt engineering. Prompt engineering in my mind is Boolean searching, just for a new generation. That will probably, evolve before we know it. But I think it's going to be about helping people understand that reading about a concept is part of it. But then how do we carve out time? How do we carve out opportunity to create that muscle memory, to actually do it, to actually try it, to actually see the result of our efforts, course correct, right? Test and learn, test and learn. And so that's what gets me excited, because I think, okay, cool. Give me the content. That's great. Now let me figure out how to help people actually transfer the learning, and make those new neural pathways. And that only happens on the back half, right? When you get to start trying it and applying it, in creating environments that allow us to do that, right? Psychologically safe environments where trial is rewarded, practices protected, et cetera.
Yeah, that the practice piece is so huge. We recently did a study, and granted, it was among frontline industry companies, restaurants, retail, where the dynamic is slightly different than you might say in an office building, right? But we did a study where we asked both employers and employees about learning, right, what their experiences, and the learners said what their biggest challenge was there's no ability to practice these skills. Like, you're going to teach me all this stuff, and then I have to do it. Like, there's no way to make sure I know what's going on. And on the one hand, you understand that in that environment, like, how am I, we got to do this, and it's high turnover and fast paced and limited time offers and all this other stuff. But at the same time, if that's the biggest challenge, and it's something that, regardless of where you work, it's something that people need, I need to at least try this before I just do it. And then you start to think, okay, like let's say in a retail world, if you're talking about interacting with customers or anywhere where you're dealing with product, do you really want people to literally learn on the job? Like, I don't know if that's productive, right? So we have to figure out a way to bake that in. And then you look at jobs that aren't like those frontline ones, where you're maybe a knowledge worker or tech worker or what have you. There still needs to be this opportunity. Like, what does this look like? Okay, you've brought me all of these elements. I've learned it. I've tried to internalize it. What does it look like when it happens? Whether it's just me and a team, whatever it is. And boy, it's always looked at as like, well, that's like a lost opportunity cost, right? Well, that if you're doing that, then you're not doing something else, because you're not actively learning as far as they think, but you're also not actively doing your job. You're doing some weird in between thing that I can't quantify. So they don't make space for it. And I think it's a really critical missing piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where these, where AI, when leveraged correctly, where these incredible, platforms that exist that help curate content, create, logical pathways for people, that's the gift. Because my worry is that we're going to mistake that then, the time savings, we're going to mistake that then for, okay, I can get back to the job faster. No, use the same amount of time. It's just the ratio is going to shift, that it's going to be less time sort of battling to find the content, what should I consume? I'm going to get it faster. I'm going to get it more personalized to me, but then I need to protect that the same time I would have spent looking for it, all that stuff. Now I can use that for practice. So that's the gift, right? But let's not squander it. Let's not mistake speed for, well, it takes less time to learn. It's not that it takes less time to learn. It's just we can spend less time on, on the consumption of the knowledge and more time on the application of it.
Yeah, I would argue as a species, we've not done a good job of reallocating the time that technology has saved us over the decades and centuries. We are always told technology is going to, this new thing is going to save time. And, the idea in the past was our life is going to be leisure because technology is going to let us do all these things. And then now in the business world, it's like, well, you're going to have more time to be more strategic, more time to focus on. I feel like nobody has really well allocated that extra time that somehow, it's gone other places that we didn't expect it to go. And I think you're spot on. If we from the front end say, listen, we may save some time here. Here's what we're going to do with it. Like, here's how we're going to do that. Not just like, hey, like
not giving it back.
Yeah. Like at the end of a meeting, hey, I'm going to give you 10 minutes back in your day. Right. That's not what this is. We have to do. We've managed to get that precious time. What do we do with it?
Well, it's Parkinson's law, right? They say work expands or contracts to the amount of time allocated. So I'm not giving back the time. I'm simply reallocating it.
100%. So this has been a fascinating conversation, and I love this stuff. And I guess it's a bit selfish because, like I said, we hadn't spoken before, but things you're saying just resonate so much in my brain. They're just bouncing all over the place, and I love to hear it. To wrap up, I want to ask you to do one of two things. You can choose what you'd like to do. I very often ask my guests to sort of like make a prediction, right? Like, what do you think, something that you've been thinking about that's going to happen in the sort of semi-near future with L&D? We can do that, or because of your role in your organization, your other option for me would be, is there something that you guys have done recently that you're like super proud of, something that really worked well, something you was new for you that you're willing to share? That would be great too. I understand if you can't. So either one of those things, or you could do both if you want.
I think I'll kind of, I don't know. I like to break the rules. So I'm going to kind of make up my own middle ground question,
Okay.
which is to say, I think when I look at what I'm proud of across the team, and what the team delivers from a learning perspective, I want to shout out the leaders of my organization because they demonstrate tremendous trust, tremendous innovation, in allowing us to experiment, in allowing us to try different ways of engaging with our learners. And, I'm gonna shout out my boss, the Global Chief People Officer, Melissa Wernick. I remember I was speaking with her one day and I said, Melissa, I keep getting asked for training for Excel. And I said, I gotta be honest, like, again, and I said, I have to stop myself and say, I can go hire another, partner to deliver this, but nothing is changing. What's happening? Right. And I said, so I have an idea. I'm going to hire a TikToker. And it was just silence. And to her credit, she said, tell me more. And I said, I've seen this TikToker and what she delivers is incredible. And I am useless at when it comes to Excel. But when I watch her, everything makes sense. So I said, I called her and she's going to come and we're going to do it. And my boss said, you know what? Okay, go, try. She's like, I don't know. But she said, go and try it. Sounds great. And we did. And it became one of the most popular things that we ran. And, people were literally putting in the comments in the chat, like, I never knew I liked Excel. Right. And Melissa now tells this story, she's told it in a number of venues. And it's to her credit that even though it was sort of something like, really, we're going to do full blessing to try and innovate. And my boss, our Chief Learning and Diversity Officer, Pam Bassi, is the same. I come to her with ideas and I say, I don't know if it's going to work, but here's why I think it might. And here's why I think it's a reason to try. And every single time she says, yes, and right. And so working for an organization that prioritizes learning the way Kraft Heinz does, allows us to experiment and frankly model the behaviors that we are trying to, impress upon our teams, is incredible. What a gift. What a joy. Do they always all work out 100%? Not always, but we're batting pretty well on what we're delivering. But it's because we have this incredible leadership that's willing to let our teams try things that are willing to break the mold of what has been done in the past. I'm very lucky never to hear, well, that's not how we've done it, which is a reality for many folks. I don't have that. I have, what's next? What can you do? What can you try? Try it, do it, go for it. Tell me how it goes. And better yet, tell me what you need. So that's what I'm proud of, to be part of an organization that thinks that way, that champions learning that way, and frankly, champions us as learning practitioners in that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, I hope, I'm imagining that people are listening to this episode either love that or extremely jealous of that. But that's a great environment to be in. And I love the idea of the TikTok for Excel. I mean, I am also of an older generation and I am not ashamed to look at TikTok and learn things from it. And it's like this idea that, for some reason it's for the kids. It's like, well, no, I mean, yes, on the one hand, the way they interact with it, yes, it's more of a younger generation, but the underlying concept, give me what I need in an engaging, quick, easy to access way, that's never changed. That's for everybody. So it's funny how,
proof, it's proof that learning is happening everywhere, that everyone is a teacher and everyone is a student. That's what I look at TikTok as, really.
Right. And it's not like you're just saying, here, literally go on TikTok and try to find something that you need. That's not, it's just taking the underlying concepts of why does this thing work, right? Why does this resonate? Why does it stick? Let's try that. And so there's a lot to be learned as learning professionals from all the stuff that's going on around us. That's a great example, and I love to hear the culture and environment you're in. You're very lucky. Although I think that's why you're there, is because I think you fit in there perfectly well with your approach as well. So I think that works great. So thanks so much for spending the time with me and sharing all this stuff. I love to get back up on these concepts so that I'm not just sort of shouting into the ether. I really feel like these are real things that I hope people can start to focus on. And look, it's not that, this isn't an admonishment. I think people are really trying to do this stuff. We know it's hard.
Everywhere.
We know it's hard. Like I said, you're lucky you're in a pretty interesting environment. It's still probably challenging for you to do some of these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we know it's easy for me to sit here and just talk about it. Like, go ahead, do this now. Right. But it's
so hard.
It is hard. But it's a journey. It's a process, and it's every day chip away. Right. And try to create a little bit more sunlight.
Incremental gains, little wins add up to big things.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I hope to catch up with you sometime soon, either at a live event or something like this again. So thank you so much.
Thanks, David. This was great.